So February's colour was red, and I read red. Oh dear, that's too many reds. How am I going to word that sentence? So we're back for the February update of my Monochromatic Year Project Pan Book Edition. This project was created as a makeup panning project by Kali over at KaliFab, who I've linked down below, as well as everyone else who's joined in on this project. But I thought I would do it a little bit differently, and I've been panning books based on the colour of that month. So the colour for February was red, and I have 6 books that I'm going to discuss with you today. So first up we have Red by Libby Gleason. Red is technically a child's novel, so it's aged appropriately for the 10 to 12-year-olds. In saying that, it does deal with quite dramatic events, which actually really related to what was happening in Australia at the time that I was reading this. Red tells the story of a little girl who wakes up in the aftermath of a cyclone that has destroyed most of coastal Sydney with no memory. She ends up tagging along with a boy who we quickly learn to be homeless before the cyclone, Perry, and he dubs her Red. The story is quite jarring in some aspects. First off, you begin with dealing with this story of a cyclone and a girl who's lost her family, her memory, and plus another little boy who appears to not have had family to begin with. So I thought at first I was going to get this story about discovering who you were, discovering your past. Yes, a bit predictable and stereotypical, but that's the type of story I thought it was going to be. It seems to quickly change from an amnesia story to more of this spy, cops and robbers style tale, which at times felt rather unrealistic, I think would be the correct term. And on top of that, without giving spoilers away, I felt the ending to be rather rushed and painted over and very much and we all lived happily ever after, where I would have rathered the story stick to the first concept of trying to find your family when you can't remember them, you can't remember who you are, in a world which is still trying to recover from a massive disaster. And on top of that, the guiding light to say the character who's meant to be assisting you on their journey is unreliable in the type of character that Perry is. He is unreliable, he's a liar, he has these beliefs which we realise is later caused by the family life he had before the disaster. That story had more, I felt, going for it than the eventual cops and robbers, spies and espionage story that it tended to turn into. In saying that, it was a very easy read. As I mentioned, it's aimed at the 10 to 12-year-olds. I'm interested to see how other works written by Gleason are written, as I actually found her writing style quite easy to follow and understand. So before crossing her out altogether, as I didn't 100% enjoy the story, I'd be interested in going and reading other takes and other stories that she's written. Moving on from Red, I then ventured into the world of adult graphic novels. I started off with Scarlet, which was published by Jinx World, which was written by Brian Michael Bendez and Alex Mayleave. Apologies if I just butchered those names. Scarlet tells the tale of a teenager / young adult who experiences great trauma by corruption within her city of Portland. The story goes on to discuss how Scarlet wants to stand up to that corruption, and I think really touches on what could happen if a new revolution started within America. The story was separated over 3 graphic novels, and I read all of them within February. The first was Scarlet Volume 1, the first was Scarlet Book 1, the second was Scarlet Book 2, and confusingly, though from my understanding it's because of a change of publisher or something similar, the third book is actually titled Scarlet Volume 1. So I might just discuss all three of those books at once, as the story as a whole takes over the three to get through. I guess the first arc of the story begins in book 1, where Scarlet experiences corruption within the police force firsthand. Not to give too much away, but something happens and she and someone very special to her get shot. This spirals her on a path which some do say within the book is rather crazy, to be exact, where she wants to stand up to corruption within Portland, corruption within all of America. But this path is her first step to that road, that revolution, by standing up to those who participated specifically in the corruption that she experienced. Book 2 then moves into the beginning of the new revolution. This is the first stand-up where police and the government are after Scarlet because of what she did within book 1. The FBI are now involved, are heavily involved, and there's a young female FBI agent who is also trying to find her. From the beginning, you know that the two FBI agents are going to have a massive impact on the story. Though I will say I was actually surprised with how their impact actually was made, if that makes sense. I don't want to give too much away and ruin the plot, but I was surprised with what happened with the FBI agents in particular. However, in book 2, the corruption and the revolution essentially spiral against each other constantly. Corrupted side of the police force and the government become very apparent within the second book, and in fact get deeper and darker as you go along. I like the fact that the story didn't just focus on Scarlet and her experiences, but also of a few of the other main characters. That trait transitions into volume 1. But those mini stories essentially within the main arc show you, create a sort of camaraderie between you and the characters. And that's also fueled by the fact that the story overall is written in a way that you are there, a part of this whole experience. And Scarlet even talks to you from within the pages. This then continues, as I said, into book 3, which is referred to as volume 1. Though I will say that is very confusing, and for anyone who picks up the book thinking it's going to be the first edition as such, will be rather confused, as it comes in essentially at the end of one story arc verging into the beginning of another. Volume 1 itself also ends with what I would consider a cliffhanger. I'm not sure whether they're going to continue this story or they're going to leave it how it is. I think the biggest message to take from the story, in whatever way you choose to look upon it, is that one person can make a difference. I'm not saying that what Scarlet does is necessarily the right way to make a difference, but one person can make a difference. I just realised I've had book 1 this whole time and I didn't even... Do I want it, or should I just use the pictures? Because I feel like I've already done all the talking. I would love to see a 4th book, or a volume 2 if you must, within this series that continues Scarlet's story into the next chapter of what happens now. And I would like to know that once the revolution is finished, once the changes have been made, how that world would look. Because this story is set in the midst of political change. cultural change. As the back says, a new American Revolution. So I would very much like to see the world that Scarlett helps forge. Is it the world that she wants without corruption and lies within authority? Or are we essentially going to go full circle and end up in a different world, possibly where those that at times are considered the anti-hero, the rebellion, whether their changes are just going to go full circle and there will just be another form of corruption and lies. Finally, I got around to reading Becoming a YouTuber. This book is by the makers of the For Dummies series, and it very much holds a similar layout. You get the main part of the information, followed by bits that are important that you need to remember, and tips and tricks to help you along the way. This is also written in a way that you do not have to read it front to back. Everything is laid out in the contents page, and you can jump around and read it however you see fit. In fact, the author actually suggests that you do so. I read it front to back, and it did not take very long to read it as a whole. I found some of it useful, though some of it I had already kind of got from having to do the beginning parts of making a YouTube channel, the videos and the tests thing that you have, the YouTube school as such that you have to follow. So overall, some of this was a bit unnecessary, and to be honest, it cost me $25. Would I say it's worth those 25 Australian dollars? I'm a bit unsure. It is well written, but it didn't provide me with anything more than I already kind of had. It is definitely a beginner's book, and is written in such a way that it is for beginners. If you're looking to begin your journey as a YouTuber, I would definitely have a look at this book. I definitely am happy I took the time to read this book. Further to that, it can now be used as a bit of a reference guide, as it is very easy to navigate to chapters and segments that I'm looking for. And finally, we have the one audiobook that I managed to get through this month. It was The Secret Recipe for Second Chances by J.D. Barrett. As you might remember from last update, I had listened to another one of J.D. Barrett's books, and I'd also listened to another one at the end of last year. This one does and doesn't fit the format that I became used to with the other two novels. Where the other two were hyper realistic, this one kind of plays the fence between both. So the story is about Lucy, who is in the process of leaving her husband. They own a restaurant together, as they are both chefs, and she decides to start a pop-up restaurant to help with her moving out. Her ex-husband, Leif, is not a nice guy, to put it nicely. We get the impression rather quickly that Lucy has not stood up for herself in a very long time. She has become rather one-dimensional, especially in regards to her relationship with Leif, and she let him control everything. The divorce is rather spiteful, and a lot of the times you feel that Lucy is teeing herself up for disaster. But that is not the kicker for this story. The location that Lucy decides to set up her pop-up restaurant is an old restaurant called Fortune, which has been out of business for a long time, something like the late 70s, early 80s. So we are dealing with a story which also runs with two parallel stories. The only thing is these stories cross over. And without giving away spoilers, they do not cross over in a way that you think they would for a hyper-realistic story. I will say, overall, between the three books that I have read from J.D. Barrett, This one was not my favourite. However, the writing style and the characterizations for her characters are in a very similar vein as those from her other tales. If you do like J.D. Barrett and her writings, I would recommend giving this one a listen or a read. So far I have read 10 books this year. As I mentioned at the start of the year, my overall goal for the 12 months was to read 12 books, which I am obviously well ahead. With that in mind, I'm considering doubling the number for my goal. So I'm going from 12 to 24. With all that in mind, my goal for March is to get through 1 audio book and an additional 2 physical books. I'm very interested to hear what others are reading, and I love receiving recommendations. I'm very eclectic in what I like to read, and though when I find an author I enjoy, I do sometimes like to try and see what other works they have that I like. I'm very much on the market for new and interesting stories and authors. So please, if you have anyone or anything, no matter what category it's in, no matter what genre it's in, no matter the author, if you think that I should take the time to read it, please list it down below. So I'm Verity. That was my February recap for the Monochromatic Project Pan book edition. And now to the outro.